Last year has been a watershed year for sustainability, as many leading aviation players made the first move and committed to biofuels and switching to SAF and electric fleet and tried to make their supply chains green. What are some initiatives Kuehne+Nagel has taken in this regard, and what do you plan for this year going forward?
Let's first talk about our own direct emissions, so scope 1 and 2. What we're doing there is specifically looking into our company vehicles and the trucks that we are running. So these are our direct emissions that we are doing in scope 1. So we are changing them to electric vehicles and trucks. In scope 2, which is the power supply that we are getting, we have now almost 90% of our power worldwide coming from green sources. So we changed the power supplier there as well. And of course, we are looking into our largest carbon emissions. And these are unfortunately coming from our indirect emissions, scope 3. And therefore, for business air freight, they are coming largely from the flight movements or the carriers. So what we're doing there is we for sure try to reduce the weight we are bringing into the air. So there we are talking about digitalisation, one of the hot spots and topics here as well at Air Cargo India, as well as consulting customers how to reduce weight or how to reduce carbon emissions, maybe by switching to other routings, other carriers with more modern aircraft. But nevertheless, we have to say that the only way for the next 15 to 20 years forward is the usage of sustainable aviation fuel, SAF. And there, of course, we are looking mainly into purchasing SAF from our carrier partners and then offering this SAF to our customers. And that is what we did last year. That was the first step into our own journey into a low carbon emission business model or no carbon emission business model that we want to achieve latest by 2050 as well. So this is first, we wanted to offer our customers a net zero carbon solution. That's what we achieved in November last year. But we now have two different options for our customers. The first option is retrospectively, basically looking what were my carbon emissions of all the shipments I did with you over a period, let's say a year or a quarter or on a lane or for a certain product. And I want to now move this into a net zero carbon air transportation. Then we would recalculate how much fuel did we use for that one. And we would then basically retrospective replace the jet fuel kerosene burnt with SAF. That is the retrospective phase. Option. And then we have a second option, and that is the more into the future looking option. That's the quoting option. So whenever we have one shipment nowadays that the customer requests to be quoted on, then on all our quote channels, be it electronic or be it offline, so still manual, we have the option to quote as well the use of sustainable aviation fuel. So the use of really net zero carbon air transportation that the customer can opt in. So he always has this option of opting in the SAF option. And that is what we offer now to customers. But of course, we're looking further into now together with carrier partners. In a second move, now we have the customer solutions ready, and customers can now basically opt for the net zero carbon transportation. We're now changing ourselves. So we will now change over the next couple of years the way how we purchase capacity, how we deal with our suppliers, be it the hauliers, be it the carriers. And together with these partners in the supply chain, we want to then basically bring the entire green movement forward.
What has been the response from your customers when you bring these green initiatives forward? Has there been resistance? Has there been some consolidation?
We see huge interest from all customers. So you can say every week I speak to a lot of customers, and basically the entire globe, particularly in Europe and the US, is pretty aware that they need to move. Most of these customers have now basically assigned to science-based targets, the initiative as well. So they have these SBTi targets in place. They need to somehow show that they are reducing or avoiding carbon emissions. So they have a certain target as well. So they are all interested. But the real last step into moving or purchasing SAF, it seems to be a long step for them. So it's not that it's basically a huge bestseller. So we are seeing a nice uptake, especially in the second option that I mentioned before. So the quoting. So in the quoting where you only have one spot shipment, let's say, then the amount of SAF you need normally is quite little. So then the premium we are talking about, because unfortunately SAF is still quite expensive. So the premium we are talking about is more or less variable, so it doesn't seem to look that much. So there we see a nice uptake, and we have a lot of customers in the meantime since we launched this in November last year. But on the really, let's say, retrospective thing, or the let's move the entire air freight we have into this SAF option, there is a slow uptake. So it's a lot of interest, and we have a lot of contracts on the table. And if you would have asked me 1 year ago, I would have said, Lakshmi, within the next 2 weeks, we see at least 3 major companies signing. We are 1 year now, and nothing happened. So,
pivoting off your first response, you launched an EV yesterday at the Mumbai airport. So, what does this do for this ecosystem in India?
I think it's just maybe a small step for the ecosystem in India and as well for us. But it's the first, I think, major step for us as well, indicating where we want to go in India. So for sure, this is just the first step into a long road, most probably. But we'll see now, the plan is to move this airport transport that it is right now. So basically doing all the transfers between the airport and the Kuehne+Nagel warehouse and back. With this EV, we'll move this from Mumbai now, and we'll do the same setup in Delhi and in Bangalore and all the other cities in India where we are present. And then we'll move into the next step, where we then extend this service not only for the airport transfers, but for the pickup and deliveries as well. And then you can really talk about a door-to-door green supply chain, because then we really have the entire transportation chain in air logistics being covered, being net zero carbon. We have the EVs on the ground. We then ideally have, of course, warehouses running with green power, green energy, and then we have the flight option as well with SAF 100 that is green as well.
So moving forward, do you foresee the long-haul version of electric aircraft being commercialized in the next 15 years? What are some limitations it faces? Would you say the weight of the batteries may be one of the features that limits the payload of the plane?
I think we cannot stress this often enough. I think it's time that the industry now really realizes, and we need to most probably stress this more often, that the electronic airplane that is really going long range is far, far, far away from today, and most probably never coming. So there were some or certain calculations that you can find on the internet as well, where they calculated that if you want to power an Airbus 320neo, which has a maximum takeoff weight of 89 tons. If we want to power this one with the same capabilities as today with a battery, the battery needs to weigh 1,100 tons. The 320 can only uplift 90 tons. So but we need to have 1,100. So this shows you that basically we are so far away when it comes to mid-range or long-range electrical powered aircraft. I don't see that for the next 15 to 20 years they are really coming. So low range, these local feeders, it's a different story, and we see these aircrafts coming, and there are certain aircrafts available that are flying already as well. But on the mid and long range, I don't see them coming. So I see that there are other options like hydrogen aircraft coming then a lot earlier, and hopefully then being available as well pretty soon, because once they are available, it doesn't mean that they have an impact, because we need to have hundreds of them being really in service. So the only way forward for the next 15 to 20 years, I believe, is sustainable aviation fuel.
You have been vocal about the need for financial incentives from the governments to narrow the substantial price gap of SAF to the traditional jet fuel kerosene, and to ease the commercialization of new SAF production technologies at large enough quantities to make them in the mid-term economically viable. What are some roadblocks in this, and what are some good moves that have happened till now, and what are some good moves that have been made by private players and governments in this regard in the last 2 years?
A lot of questions in one question.
Yeah.
I think when we look into SAF, we have 3 problems there. The first problem is it's a chicken and egg situation at the moment. So at the moment, the premium for SAF is quite high. So of course, customers are not really keen in buying SAF because of the currently anyhow quite high air rates that are out there in the market. And I can understand all the logistics and procurement departments saying, well, we most probably overspent our air budget already this year anyhow, and who knows how much worse it still gets. So let's hold back the other millions that we might now want to spend onto SAF, because we don't know basically if we might need them somewhere else. So the premium for SAF is more or less at the moment prohibitive of really rolling out SAF in large scale. Then, of course, on the other side, you have the SAF that is available. The quantities are limited. So I mentioned before that we might see a couple of customers signing up. I think I can already now say if we have 3 or 4 large customers signing up for SAF, there is not enough SAF in the market. So I would assume that already the 3rd customer, I would have to tell, listen, this is nice, but you are too late, because there is just not sufficient SAF in the market. So we need to get more SAF into the market. And with that, I think you need to have incentives or subsidies from governments, unfortunately, that make the premium of SAF smaller to become more attractive for customers to purchasing SAF. But then overall, we have to see that the only currently available method to produce SAF commercially is the biological SAF, bio-SAF. So it's the HEFA method, the hydroprocessed esters and fatty acids. So it's basically tallow from slaughtered cattle or used cooking oil. And then there is not sufficient used cooking oil and cattle available that we can slaughter. So overall, this biological SAF will always only be able to cater for less than 10% of the need of the aviation industry. So even if we would have a full uptake in SAF, there is not sufficient SAF on the biological way. So we need to have a new method of producing SAF, and this is at the end synthetic SAF, and synthetic SAF means power to liquid. So we find a way to store power in a liquid way, and that is what we are now supporting as well together with Lufthansa. We announced that last year we are now supporting the first ever factory in northern Germany that is producing synthetic SAF in very, very small amounts so far still, but that is the future. So we need to push this technology or other technologies that are there as well, and this needs incentives as well, or this needs mandates from governments as well for the use of SAF. So we need the governments on one hand to push and promote now the use of SAF with subsidies and incentives to get the premium lower, and on the other hand to really incentivize the future technologies for producing SAF. Plus, not to forget, we see that on the customer side there is still a lot of work to be done in regards to skills and knowledge and maybe as well standards, because there is a lot of uncertainty as well right now. How sustainable is this SAF really? Is it really sustainable? Can I really claim scope-free emission savings and carbon reductions? Or will somebody come and tell me, no, this is greenwashing or this is a fake or whatsoever? So we need to do a lot of work there as well.
Do you think the industry should come together for this and maintain some standards or some SOPs with regards to this? Or do you feel it should be the governments that should come up with these regulations? Who could be the first mover in this case?
I think the first move now would be, of course, the governments are starting subsidizing the use of SAF so that the premium becomes lower, that we get more uptake on SAF. So we see, you asked for good examples. We see at the moment 3 regions in the world that do this already. That's the Netherlands, the UK, and California, specifically in the US. And that's normally where we as Kuehne+Nagel purchase our SAF. This is from these 3 regions. Then we see, of course, the US and the EU governments or legislations moving into certain mandates. So we have in the EU this Fit for 55, so reducing carbon emissions by 55% by the end of 2030. So that's of course something that is pointing into the right direction, but now we need to translate this into real measures and into clear mandates. So we have mandates in first countries. So France, for example, now introduced since 1st of January this year the mandate for 1% of SAF that needs to be in all the flights that are departing in French airports. So that's good, but we need to have more of this, and most probably then more than 1% as well. So that would help.
So coming back to our global supply chains, now that restrictions on passenger flights have been lifted, the air bubbles are no more in place. Do you think air freight capacity will return and freight rates would stabilize? Also, I believe BSAs have moved from a yearly to a monthly and even a 14-day basis. So where does this stand now?
I think you need to most probably now split the globe into various regions. Because even though we think that passenger traffic is back to normal, let's say it's not really. Because if we look into China is just coming out of a lockdown now in Shanghai. It's still under lockdown in Beijing. So we still don't have a normal situation with passenger flights and freighter movements like pre-COVID times into China. And of course, China is the powerhouse for exports still at the moment. So we cannot say it's normal. When we look into the transatlantic traffic, then of course there we can say it was always dominated by belly freight, and a lot of the passenger flights are now back. So the transatlantic situation is normally now back to normal, we can say. But there is still what helps us for sure keeping air freight rates high is the situation on the seaside. And we need to see how this develops. So as long as there is this container shortage and these delays in front of ports, and now we have the uncertainty whether the West Coast harbors, because of the union agreements are now expiring end of June, whether the harbors are not going on to strike from July onwards, which will of course worsen the situation again. So yes, there is a certain normality kicking in, but because of all the surrounding noise, I think it's too early to say that we are back to normal. So you have some
still in recovery.
Good signs, and you have some, I think, bad signs as well. Not to forget here, of course, the impact of the Ukrainian war and the sanctions onto Russia, where basically a couple of Russian airlines that were quite large on the freight side as well are gone. You have the restriction on the rail side as well. So the rail is gone as well from China into Europe that went via Russia. So basically these are kind of signs on the other side that we are still not back to normal.
We hear constant talk of the industry switching to digitalisation and automation and adopting tech tools like machine learning, AI, blockchain and IoT. What are some digital initiatives undertaken by Kuehne+Nagel for air logistics in this regard?
Since I joined and even before, we're always into technology and into driving our business and our efficiency and the operations with the help of technology, data, and IT. So for us, that's nothing new. We have already a global operating system since the year 2000. We moved into digitalizing all our documents that are surrounding an air transportation since more than 15 years. We are digital. So the most recent endeavors we are doing there is a project called ETouch. And in ETouch, we are now examining all the touch points we still have with our suppliers and the customers, and we are digitalizing them. So this is a project that is running since 2 years. So now we are, for example, moving into APIs to our carriers when it comes to booking or quoting. We're using the booking platforms partly as well. We're looking into the digital invoicing, and on the customer side, we are looking into, of course, more quoting, booking, and tracking possibilities and interactions that we are doing there. When it comes to big data and IoT, then we are of course, we have a lot of data, and now it's a bit a matter of making sense of this data. So we have 2 large projects running there. One is all in the area of prediction and then prescription. So we want to use data to more or less predict various things that will happen in the future.
Forecasting.
Be it capacity, be it pricing, of course, but be it events as well that would happen to an individual shipment. So if you think about a pharma shipment, then we are now starting as well looking into the risk the shipment might now endeavor in the near future on its way. And this might then influence certain decisions we allow our operations to take as well in the system. So it might well be that because of these predictions of the future, we come to the prescriptive analytics. And in the prescription, this system that we're having, or the intelligence would tell our operation system, don't show this routing any longer because it's not working any longer. There's a strike or whatsoever. So that's what we are doing. So this is one area. The other area is, again, the area of visibility. And
this is already in play, this forecasting.
Well, this is something that we are working on. So we call this tool that we're having that is doing this Kuehne+. Kuehne+ for the past years always have been static. So it was always the same risk that when you shipped a certain pharma shipment, it was always the same risk in a station for a carrier, we always had the same risk. Now basically we're moving into dynamic, and this dynamic thing is now evolving. So we are adding more and more components and data onto this model that allows an even better prescription in the future. And in the real-time monitoring area, we for a long time looked into devices that you add to a shipment, coming from the pharma side normally as well, monitoring the temperature. But with that device came, of course, location, shock, light, and so on. But we realized that the device is quite cumbersome to handle because it adds handling steps. It adds a lithium-ion battery that is DGR, so you normally can only add 2 of these devices onto a master error bill. And it leads to a lot of errors, basically, in day-to-day handling these devices. So we are now moving into basically applying this logic of real-time monitoring into our flow. And this means we are at the moment having a pilot that is replacing the IATA labels that we stick onto each box anyhow. These labels are replaced with a smart label. So the IATA label becomes a smart label. The smart label has a printed battery inside, a Bluetooth chip, and a sensor. And with this technology, we basically enable each box we are moving to tell us where it is. And with that, we are now moving into automatically updating statuses. Because now with geofencing of our warehouses and the trucks and the routes, I can immediately tell where is the shipment, was it split, did it make the flight or not. So this is the future that we are now looking into.
So e-commerce has been a sweet spot in the otherwise 2 grim years of the air cargo industry during the pandemic. As markets continue to recover, could you shed some light on how e-commerce is and will be impacting the industry, and on the proliferation of freighters in the industry for the next 2-3 years?
I think the past years were not necessarily bad years for the industry, because let's face it.
Because cargo went center.
For the first time ever, yes, cargo was really considered crucial for all of us actually in daily life. So we became well known, I think, and one of the most critically looked at sectors globally. Plus, not to forget that over the past 2 years, I think for the first time ever, all cargo segments and all cargo airlines made a lot of money. So I think it was more good years for the logistics and specifically the air freight industry. When I talk about e-commerce, and of course, when it comes to volumes, we see always each year increasing e-commerce volumes with impressive growth numbers. That will most probably continue because, of course, during the pandemic, the customer behavior was more or less moving into this. I shop from home and I get it more or less immediately. So there is an increased e-commerce traffic moving, I would say. Whether this is then still the volumes that fill basically the bellies of hundreds of freighters, we still need to see. Because I would assume that once the passenger freight fleet is back to normal. We see a lot of belly fill there as well. We need to see as well how the lithium-ion discussions are further basically evolving, whether we see a ban in the future for lithium-ion batteries, for example. That would, of course, then kill a lot of this e-commerce business, I think, at least all the electronics. So let's see how this evolves. But for sure, this is one of the growth cornerstones we can base on for the future. What does it mean for the freighter or forecasting? I think, yes. I mean, if you look into all the airlines now, there seems to be now a I order more freighters frenzy. Whether this is really sustainable, we still need to see. So I'm too convinced. I mean, at the moment, the situation is like that there is an undercapacity clearly in the market, but this is more or less caused by certain situations or that are maybe going away sooner or later. And then we need to see how the real new situation kicks in, whether this high yield level is still being maintained or not. And this is all up in the air. So I would more foresee that this calms down and we see a normalization of rates over, let's say, the next at least 2-3 years. And whether then there is still this high demand for freighters up there in the air, I don't know.
Thank you, Marcel.
Pleasure. Thank you, Lakshmi. Thanks for having me.